Welcome to the computer security seminar. Today's speaker gave a talk about 2 years ago. He gave part one of this talk. Today he's going to give part two of the talk. Our speaker today is David Ford. He's going to speak about chaos, complexity, cybernetics, and Therminator. Dave.
Thank you very much, Sam. It's great to be here at Purdue, and it's nice to be here when it's not raining. Last time I was here, it was raining like crazy, and it's particularly nice in the spring. So lucky you guys. I envy you that. I'm out in California, and it's always kind of nice, which is good and bad, because then you miss things like spring and fall a lot. So it's a pleasant time to be here. Like Sam said, I gave the first part of this talk last 2 years ago, and I thought it was like an hour and a half talk, and we got through about half an hour of it, and a class came in, so I didn't get very far. So basically it's the second half of that talk, but I've also modernized it a little bit by including some other material, basically the chaos stuff and the complexity stuff, that are things that are of interest to the Defense Department even as we speak. So basically I'm trying to compare things that are funded right now that are not maybe in the traditional IDS category. So it's stuff that people are applying to computer network traffic, computer network defense, but it's not maybe the traditional stuff, but it is stuff that is of growing interest, I guess to say. So maybe it's unfortunately still in the advanced category, but probably not that much longer, because I think we've sort of fleshed out a lot of the virus type, signature type devices, and kind of know how that works now. Maybe people are ready to, beef those up or augment those a little bit. So without further ado, cleverly titled "Low Dimensional Answers to High Dimensional Questions." I thought that was really, really clever. Like would you buy a used car from this guy? It's the most jingly title I think I've ever come up with. Okay, so a little bit of history to ramp up. I was a new guy at NSA in 1998, and there we run off of things called these presidential decision directives, and one that you guys are probably familiar with is Presidential Decision Directive number 63, and that was on critical infrastructure protection. And they break these things out. FBI's detailed to do this, and Department of Energy does that. And NSA was tasked at that time to do research on computer network defense. So that was sort of our piece of the puzzle to work on. Okay, so what does that mean? And like I said, our particular emphasis was on computer network defense, internet defense, and in particular non-invasive, invasive approaches. Meaning we didn't want to read people's email. We just wanted to somehow to kind of keep tabs on what was going on and watching out for the privacy of citizens. Okay, I know there's things in the news lately to the contrary, but we didn't have anything to do with that. All right, so some of the non-invasive approaches. Things from chaos, dynamical systems theory. I don't know if anybody here is much of a chaos fan or something like that. A lot of things from complexity theory, a big enclave of folks doing that out at the Santa Fe Institute in New Mexico. And other things that we've done are the thermodynamic approach, which is stuff we call Therminator. And I was going to sort of compare these three schools of thought and kind of show maybe aren't they all kind of thermodynamics in the end, and just kind of justify why we did what we did, all those years ago now, unfortunately, a long time back. But still, again, unfortunately, ahead of the curve, unbelievably. Okay, so just to kind of get some language set and some concepts set, here's just a little toy network. I know you guys know the internet doesn't really work like this, but it just sort of helps us get a common vocabulary maybe to get started. So let's suppose that it's a toy network, and the only possible packets are 2 bits long. So I guess by my counting, that gives us 4 possible packets. And one friend might want to send a message to another friend. Maybe they wanted to go on a walk. So it's a pretty simple packet structure. You can't say a lot with 2 bits. But maybe they managed to send a simple message like, let's meet at 2 o'clock. And the other friend says, yes, bring donuts. Something like this. Maybe they want to go for a hike or something like that. All right. So with that, we can take the 4 packets maybe and map them to the 4 directions, north, south, east, west, say. And if I do that and I look at my traffic on a network, I kind of get a picture, and I hope you can see it there, like the little blue path. Can you see the little blue path okay in the front? So I can make a connection. What I want to do here is make a connection between the data and some kind of a visual. And I want it to be kind of one-to-one. I want it to be, have the same information content in it that the bit stream does. Of course, here it's not exactly the same because once there's a loop, this is even data reduction. But I guess the point is it's no harder than the real internet traffic. Almost as hard, and there's a lot there to look at. And you recover a lot from just looking at the picture. Okay, now you guys know real packets aren't 2 bits long, so let's up the complexity a little bit and make them 3 bits long. And maybe that allows me to say more complex things rather than not just let's meet at 2, but let's meet at the origin at 2. And now it gives me a chance to put chocolate on the donuts. So things get a little more involved. But unfortunately, so does the number of directions, the number of degrees of freedom available to me now go from 4 to 8. And the path that my traffic takes on this graph also is a little bit more involved. So we get a little bit of trade-off. Okay, this is the biggest number that I know of. You guys might know bigger numbers, and I'm sure Professor Wagstaff knows of much bigger numbers, but has anybody computed what 2 to the 1500 times 8 is? That's the number of different types of packets you could conceivably have. It's like 10 to the 3612. That's like the biggest number that I know about. So before, when we said we had 4 directions for packets that are 2 bits long, and we have 8 directions for packets that are 3 bits long, this is packets that are realistic 12,000 bit long packets. That's a lot of different directions. So what happens when I try to look at a graph of a message now? Well, I could get something that's pretty bizarre looking. I don't know what to make of that. Again, it's certainly no harder than the actual message. It's maybe a little bit easier if you think about the loops as being sort of a redundancy. But the dichotomy here is that even though the traffic itself looks complex, maybe it's someone just trying to do something really, really simple. So on one hand, it's just a guy trying to get directions, say, to a hiking location called Birdall Field. He's trying to get them from MapQuest, something very reasonable and pretty simple and pretty understandable that a human would want to do. But if I look at it, just look at the facts, it's this horrifically bizarre, complex knot of stuff. So it's a dichotomy. The goal is to somehow bridge the gap between the two truths here. So the human can be aware at a glance of what's going on with the network traffic, and faithful representation that a human can just sort of absorb easily. Okay, so I kind of said that we've got a high-dimensional tangled mess, and we didn't go out of our way to make the problem hard. It really is. If you look at it, just matter-of-factly, it is kind of hard. I mean, there is really 10 to the 3,612 degrees of freedom. That's called high-dimensional in a lot of circles. So what to do about it? So we thought there was 2 roads. One of them is ad hoc personal best, and the other one is just try to apply some science to it. So, we're all out of grad school in our class, the class of 98, incoming class NSA, and everybody wants to show how smart they are and all this kind of stuff, and guys in there are a lot smarter than me, of course, and all that's all well and good. But, the management came down and said, it's really an important problem. I want you to do the very best you can, So we thought, rather than just sort of rely on the circle of N people being the smartest people ever born, maybe we'd go out and look at outside ideas and bring in what we could from existing sciences. Many generations of people, maybe even smarter than us, gasp. So there you go. So when we did that, the sciences kind of jumped out. We're in the business of taking high-dimensional things like that network, the path of a message through that bit space, if you will. The sciences that were kind of in the business of taking high-dimensional things and making them low-dimensional were, chaos, complexity, cybernetics, and thermodynamics. Okay, so the first topic we'll touch on is chaos and dynamical systems, and you can tell it's chaotic because the letters are jumbly. That's sort of a joke. Maybe not that funny, but okay. It's a tough crowd. I just flew in from California. My arms are tired. Okay. All right, so just a quick overview, and if you don't know some of this stuff, or please ask any question you want. I'm not Mr. Chaos, but I know a little bit. I'm happy to try to fill in some of the background. This is just very overview to get the flavor of the kind of things that people do. But the main point here is that basically the chaos stuff works off of equations. There's some equation lurking in the background. And you may know what the equation is, or you may not. So you might just be like monitoring some system that's driven by an equation, but you're not told what the equation is, or you might have the equation in hand and then you go and generate your own data and see what it is. So people wonder questions like, is there an equation for the internet that would model the internet? Is there such an equation? Is there a simpler question? Is there an equation that would predict, DNS activity, just a chunk of the internet in a local space and a local function kind of thing? So people might wonder if there is such a function, and if it's really high dimensional, can we bring it down to a simpler picture that as humans we can kind of just look at and understand intuitively? So these are the kind of things that people do. So I guess kind of said that that's the hope, is that you can take a high dimensional thing, and in the chaos business they call these things manifolds, inertial manifolds, and center manifolds, all these different called manifolds. And folks had some geometry, already know all about that. But the idea is that the thing that's 3,612 dimensional, those packets we talked about, maybe that's true, but maybe you typically don't explore all that space. Maybe you really only use a smaller chunk of it. And you hear people talk about these fractals. I should have included a fractal picture, now I regret that I did not, but we've seen them. They're kind of fancy spiral-looking things. How do people ever make these beautiful pictures and they generate them with some polynomial iterations of some polynomial or something like this? And those things typically have dimensions that are non-integer, like 2.3 or 1.7. So these attractors or these manifolds aren't necessarily squares and rectangles that we're familiar with, but they're low-dimensional things, and in their own right, they're things that we can look at and recognize as shapes. And the good news is we've reduced the number of dimensions from high to low. So I'm just trying to present on a good day, one behind your back, what can this chaos theory kind of stuff do for you? Not trying to be critical, just trying to paint kind of a sunshiny picture. So an example, as talked about, is this inertial manifold for, what do I have here? Oh, the Kirimoto equation we'll talk about really, really briefly. And another example is this Henon map, which just is a standard one. When you take your first year course in chaos stuff, this is the one that'll show up, and I'll show you pictures of that now. So we can go ahead and see what we've got here. Okay, I like to call it the erotic croissant, and I don't know if those dots are showing up, but the purple lines are kind of pointing to the first 100 dots. So if you watch this thing as a time series, and you're saying, okay, I'm going to watch this, I'm going to go ahead and observe this system, whatever it is. I'd see a dot maybe down on the lower right, and then a dot on the upper right, and they just kind of pop around like popcorn. And I might think, this is a totally random, bizarre thing. There's no structure here whatsoever. I might as well just be looking at the uniform measure on the plane. But when you go ahead and you look at 500 points, you can kind of see some sort of a shape starting to occur. And at 1,000 points, you get even more of the shape. And at 5,000 points, there's even more. You can kind of see that it is something. It's not something that we'd call a line exactly. It's like 1.23 something dimensional. It's one of these fractal type dimension things. But certainly it's not a random thing. I mean, there's a definite geometry to it there. And if you go ahead and zoom in, you can kind of see some of the structure. There's in the light blue, if that's coming across with the big dot, that's the attractor, the 1.2 ... dimensional attractor. And the purple line coming off and that blue line coming down and making the zigzags, those are all the manifold, for the stable manifold for that fixed point. So those are the points that over time will tend to zoom in on that fixed point as you iterate forward in time. So there's a lot of structure there. It's not random at all. It lives in its own world. Maybe we don't understand it readily, but certainly it's not, a million dimensions. It's some definite structure that we want to learn to appreciate. That's the kind of thing that on a good day the chaos stuff will do for you. Okay, good news and bad news. Oops. Okay. Right, so bad news, sometimes these equations will evolve. If you have an equation, that's the best case scenario for the chaos stuff, is you have the equation that's making the dynamics. It can evolve a dimension that's system that's infinite dimensional, which is even higher than 3,000, 10 to the 3,612. It's like 10 times that or something. Another tough crowd. Okay. The good news is that this Cyprian Foyas has proved a theorem on inertial manifolds that if conditions are right, that the dynamics does indeed lie not on an infinite dimensional thing, but on a finite dimensional thing. And then the game is to run around and find out what are the names of those modes. And so if I want to understand the dynamics of this large dimensional thing, if I watch the right modes, I've simplified the problem for myself. And in the context of these partial differential equations and large systems of ordinary differential equations, these inertial manifolds exist. So that's the good news. There is hope. Really, really does exist kind of thing. So here's kind of a picture of how that goes. Here's a high dimensional Hilbert space where those solution. So there's two solutions, and they're kind of nearby each other in this Hilbert space, and we project onto the low-dimensional modes, which are few in number, say like 5 or 6 or 7 or something like this. And the rest of the dynamics are these high modes, which is infinity minus 7, which probably is still quite a few. And if there's this thing called a squeezing cone, which says that the low-dimensional modes stay closer over time than the high-dimensional modes stay closer, then we're going to get this inertial manifold. So that's kind of the good news. The bad news is that he gives the people like to use the word slave, that the high modes are slaves to the low modes, that whatever the low modes do, there's some graph that ties the dynamics of the high modes to whatever the low modes do. So I do this, and half of the infinity of the modes do that, and the other low mode does something, the other half of the infinity, tough crowd, does something else. So and that's the good news, but it doesn't tell you what the graph is. It's not really constructive. So the bad news is, what was that graph again? So it exists, but then, so there's lots of methods for finding approximate manifolds, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So it's not that it can't be done, but that's sort of the good news. Is high-dimensional thing. There's equations behind them which you may have or you might have to find. If the conditions are right, yes, it'll reduce to some low-dimensional thing, which is the description that we're after. It faithfully tells you about the dynamics, and that's sort of the punchline of the chaos stuff. And you can tell it's the punchline of the chaos stuff because I have my next intro slide, the complex systems, and you can tell that it's complex because the letters are all jumbly. So, thank you. It's very similar. They're similar in that they use the same font. I don't know what it's the similarity in the two subjects. So any questions on the chaos stuff before we move on, or it's just in an overview, just to give you a feeling of what can go right if it goes right. And in the summary again, as it goes from high dimensional to low. Okay, so here's the chaos stuff, or the complex system stuff, sorry. And in this stuff, typically it's like a school play. You give a where, the setting for the play, and then kind of a how. So the where is a graph, like the internet might be a graph, which computers are connected to who, kind of a thing. And then you give interaction rules for the graph. So you specify a where, and you specify a how. And typically the where and the how have parameters in, like how many computers on average are connected to what, or which machines talk to each other and which ones don't, like who's the server, for example, in a computer network kind of a situation. So you specify a graph and interaction rules on this graph, and once you do that, you just let the thing evolve and you wait for this magic thing to happen that they call emergence. And we're going to have a couple examples of that. Oh, nice. Okay, and they also call it large-scale coherent behavior. And what can happen then is, rather than having to pay attention to this microscopic level, every node in the graph, and the dynamics of all the nodes over time, if this macroscopic emergent thing happens, I just get to watch, again, a finite number of collective modes. And we'll give a couple famous examples of that here. Perhaps the most famous is this one, is this Kirimoto Oscillator Network. People notice that fireflies, they blink, they glow in the dark. People notice that sometimes they tend to kind of glow at the same time. And crickets sometimes tend to chirp at the same time. And locusts, I think, tend to do that locust thing, kind of at the same time. And also superconducting Josephson junctions tend to do this kind of thing at the same time. So you have maybe intelligent independent beings, but also kind of a non-intelligent Josephson junction. And they tend to all, if the parameters are set right, they can exhibit this collective dynamic. So this is the hope for making low number of things tell the story of a high dimensional things. If there's a zillion crickets and they're all chirping at the same frequency, I just need to know about one frequency rather than the zillion crickets. Is based to give the punchline away here. Okay, so here's an equation. This is the Kirimoto Oscillator Network. And the theta dots are the phases. So an oscillator just kind of goes up and down, but if I turn it sideways, I might think of it as going around a circle, right? It's going up and down, hopefully for somebody, kind of thing. So think about the angular velocity as being how many cycles per second. So maybe I have a circle with a bunch of oscillators on it. Some of them are going like this, some are going like this, and then there's an interaction rule, which is given there in the equation where the sign is. The phase velocity of the ith guy on the left-hand side is a function of the sum over all the phase velocities, the j's, the theta sub j's. So they kind of talk to each other. And that parameter k is an example of the how. That where of it is on the unit circle, And the how of it, and this is a very simple example, is just got one parameter in it, and that's that k. So you might want to look at what happens to this behavior. Do I have to pay attention to the angular velocities of all 10,000 oscillators? Or maybe sometimes this collective thing happens and the situation gets much simpler. So here's my toy cartoon of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 oscillators, and the different colors means they're going around each with their own speed. And if things happen right, da-da-da-da, I'm particularly proud of that slide. You can get them to kind of all turn. Ooh, do that again. You can get them to kind of all turn with the same velocity. So rather than having to pay attention to 5, and the 5 could be 5 million, you can just pay attention to 1. So that's an idea, an example of a emergent success story. That there was a lot of things maybe to pay attention to, but somehow when the parameters set right, everything locked and went poof, made it very, very much simpler. So here's some numerical work on that. It just kind of shows if my k, my parameter, my how parameter is too big, this guy just keeps lapping, I guess, the other guy, and they get farther and farther and farther apart. He just keeps lapping them like the Indy 500 and just keeps going around. But if the k is set lower than a critical value, the phases lock, which is kind of cool because n is n. It could be a million, and it just sort of says that these million things are going to lock into a common velocity. So that's the standard example for an emergent phenomena. Here's one occurring in nature, which I thought was just kind of cool, just to briefly bring up. It's a volcano someplace in Southeast Asia, and the water's heated on the bottom. I don't know if you can see from the top those cells that have formed, these convection cells. So here's a large number of things that don't have any intelligence to them, like crickets and fireflies do. They're somehow locked in some collective mode. So rather than have to worry about the individual velocity of 80 gazillion water molecules, I can watch the 10 or 12, and there's a simulation of how that kind of thing works, where they make a boundary by the flow going like this, and they kind of lock in with each other. So here's another example of collective emergence of some collective dynamic. So just to give you an idea of the kind of things that people are finding. So in recap, if we have an equation for a system, or maybe we have data from a system that we can sort of theorize there's an equation behind it, or we're going to make up a model equation for it, we can try to project modes and get a lower dimensional set of equations that way. Or we can hope for some sort of an emergent phenomenon to take place if we get the parameters set right. And here was another example of our emergent phenomenon. And here is my other joke slide. Tough crowd. We did the erratic croissant, our example of an attractor of one of these 1.2 dimensional manifold kind of thing. So that's basically the lay of the land. We have chaos and emergence in complex systems kind of represented on that slide. And they're all examples of dimensional reduction. Right? That's what we wanted to do. We wanted to look at internet traffic and understand at a glance somehow what it was doing, and be able to, as humans, be aware of, the comings and goings of that. So here's my other jingle slide. On a good day, if we do it right, yes, we can get low-dimensional answers to high-dimensional questions. So that sounds really, really hopeful, So that's why people around DoD are funding things like research and, the internet as a high-dimensional dynamical system, or the notion of emergence, and also the Therminator work. The benefit being the dimensional reduction. Okay. So what does this say? Right. Okay. So if we win, we get these low number of modes. Say 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 modes. So here's an example of what familiar modes are. So the sounds of an orchestra. So I can tell the tubas from the percussion. I might not know what color tie the guy with the cymbals is wearing, but I can course in the orchestra, and I can kind of break it down into a handful of sounds, And the smells of a pizza parlor is the same. I can smell mushrooms and I can smell onion. I don't know if it's a red onion maybe or a yellow onion, but I can just kind of group these smells coming out of a pizza restaurant into modes, this kind of a thing. Okay, and the modes may interact. That's kind of the joke slide. That's not that funny either. Thank you, God. Thank you. People work hard on these jokes, really. Okay, so there you go. Right. So how did they interact with these various mechanisms? Through an equation, through their action on various, polynomials. Mechanically, chemically, if it's a physical, chemical experiment type of thing. Logically, if it's a circuit. So there's ways these modes interact with each other. Okay. And the modes are system specific. So if we break down the, I guess it's the complexity on the top arrow and the chaos and dynamical system stuff on the bottom arrow, if we want to get the modes, we take the interaction rules in the graph construction, and so we had that parameter k. If it was too high, I think the phases diverged. If it was low enough, they phase locked. There might be 10 or 12 such parameters in a more realistic kind of a high-dimensional thing of interest. So you kind of have to exhaust the phase space and just kind of poke around and say, anything emerge here? Well, no. How about over? That can take a long time to, a 12 by 12-dimensional cube and exhausting the space, that can get pretty computationally intensive. So people come up with these genetic algorithms to kind of optimize search, and it's a whole subject into itself. But basically, you kind of got to poke around and guess, which is kind of basically what that says. And in the case of the dynamical systems, the Fourier guy, who was our light in the darkness, who said, yes, if the PDEs have this squeezing cone property, you can go from this high-dimensional, even infinite-dimensional system to a low-dimensional one. Someone asked him, well, how would you go about finding these low number of modes? And he said, well, I would ask, basically, his sentiment, my words, he said I would ask a subject matter expert. So, if, for example, if I was dealing with a fluid, I would go find an experimentalist who knows a lot about fluids and ask him what did he expect to see. Because people, what modes do they see when they go to actually implement this kind of thing? And I would ask. So that's why I say, make a best guess kind of thing. So Fourier ask and say is something you can do if you can, project, but we don't have to talk about that today. So here's the cybernetics slide. A guy named Norbert Wiener, famous guy, 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, MIT guy, contributed to a lot of different places. Cybernetics there towards the end, which kind of has a bad rap because it kind of got absorbed into, popularized in places, maybe the softer sciences, so maybe it has a thought of maybe as more of a wishy-washy kind of circle of ideas than maybe that it really is. But something that I think is relevant for what we're talking about right now is he says something about the behavior of such systems may be interpreted as directed to the attainment of a goal. So when people are saying, how am I going to find these modes? I've just constructed this big complex machine with a lot of moving parts in it. How do I know what the modes are? Maybe these modes were designed to do something, and maybe they're just simply trying to do that. So it's kind of a pointer on what path to take. So the next part of the talk is be careful you get what you wish for, because what if we get these low-dimensional modes? What are we going to do with them? Okay, so I called it post-traumatic distress disorder, because we went through all this work to maybe get these modes, and now that we got what we wanted, we don't know what to do. You almost laughed. I thought that was good. That's thank you. Okay. I try to put a joke on like every other slide, so just laugh on the odd ones, and probably okay. Huh? Oh, okay. Well, you're exempt. You're having fun with your voice today. Okay. All right. So suppose that I got these modes. Now what am I going to do? So how do I make good use of that? What business am I in now? So the thing is, I think it's thermodynamics, and I'll try to tell you why I think that. So then this is nothing that I've come up with. This is just the standard stuff. And of course, remember, this is a very old discipline. It's like 1820s, or if you think about people trying to measure temperature of vats of bubbling stuff in the Middle Ages, it's even older than that. But science, think a couple hundred years old anyway, just for a manner of speaking. But the standard go path is you have a configuration vector, and that's plays the role of these low number of modes, and that's how you describe the system to yourself. And it has a conjugate, meaning you dot those two things together and you get a scalar number. And famous pairs that you all know about are pressure and volume, are a famous pair of configuration and conjugate. You want the work, you take the pressure times the volume change, and it gives you some work. And if you want to do the same thing with a magnet, you take the magnetization and you do the applied field a little bit, and you get some work there. Now, if you're careful, you'll notice that magnets and gases have really nothing to do with each other. They're totally different systems. But somehow there's this mathematical structure that kind of is behind them, and it's just above it there in the notion of this configuration and this work conjugate for the configuration. So it applies to lots of different data generating systems, not just physical ones, is kind of the point of view, and that's kind of controversial, and that's the researchy part of this. So if you go to the library and look for a book on the thermodynamics of information theory, you won't find it. It's only here today, so you can find your high-dimensional. Make those checks out to Dave Ford, care of, that's a joke. Okay. It's a tough crowd. Okay. If you want to make the checks out, go ahead. Don't let me stop you. Okay. All right. So that's the work part of the show, and then the heat part of it is famous. Entropy's been around in information theory for going on 60 years, so that you will find, but the rest of it is so we have a science already. It's been around for a long time of describing the dynamics of a low number of modes. Like the pressure in the tire. I don't ask the garage mechanic where all the molecular positions and velocities in my tire are. I just ask him to kick it or something, and he says it seems like it's full of air, and I'm happy, and I drive off. So that's my low-dimensional description of a high-dimensional thing, and I'm happy with the notion of pressure and the volume of my tire. And if I throw my refrigerator magnet against the refrigerator and it sticks, I'm happy. I don't need to know all the individual alignments on this 2 to the millionth degree of freedom system. I'm just happy if it sticks or if it falls on the floor, I got to pick it up. So we're happy with these low-dimensional descriptions most of the time. So thermodynamics kind of has this folklore rap, since it is such a long history of success. It's kind of a victim of its own success. People identify it with kicking the tire or throwing the refrigerator magnet against the refrigerator, and they say, but isn't thermodynamics, something other than maybe what it really is, So this is an interesting paper, 1989. This guy Mori in Japan, smart guy, and did a lot of work in chaos himself. And he says, when I was a kid, we lived in the country, a lot of bikers would come up and down our road. And for some reason, I can't tell you why, but the most horrific thing that could happen is the bikers would park their motorcycles on your yard. And I can't remember why that was supposed to be horrific, but they might stop and maybe have a drink of water or pick an apple off a tree on the side of the road, but they parked on your yard. I don't know, that was like this horrific thing, So somehow Mori parked on their yard in the sense that he did thermodynamics right on this attractor. So people think of thermodynamics as this, equilibrium, very slow, very, I don't know what, tame kind of a thing, which it is, but it's tame on this 1.2 dimensional thing. So he kind of took the thermodynamics and he put it on the attractor, and as his observables was these fluctuations. This thing takes the plane and smushes it. Some directions it kind of expands, and some directions it kind of mushes together. That's why it looks like a croissant with all these layers to it. So he went ahead and says, if I'm riding on the attractor, I'm going to measure locally my expansion, and that's going to be my observable. So as I run around, I just kind of measure a pressure fluctuation in tire. I'm measuring the rate of volume, the local expansion factors in these output off exponents as I run around on this attractor, and did thermodynamics with that as the observable, and everything went through just fine. So people will tell you thermodynamics is equilibrium, thermodynamics is this, is that. Well, if you get to say what your own observables are, then everything's going to be fine. So I like to think of it as I'm eating dinner, I'm eating a salad, I can take the fork and stab a cucumber and I can eat it, or I can poke myself in the ear with it. I mean, it's my fork and I was driving it, so if I want to use it for success, I can manage to do that. I can also manage to drive it into failure. So if you pick the modes right, you'll be able to make thermodynamics work for you. If you pick the modes wrong, then but it's not the fault of the theory. The theory has to meet the application at some point, and you have to make sure that you get that right. So I just wanted to dispel the myth. It's an old paper. It's 25 years old, but 15 years old. Used to be able to do math. 16. Never mind. An integer less than 20 greater than 10, number of years old, and people seem to think that thermodynamics is just this equilibrium thing, but it can be applied to complex things, even like a fractal dimensioned kind of an attractor. Okay, so the internet. So that ends our whirlwind tour of complexity, chaos, cybernetics, and thermodynamics. Wow, all in 32 minutes or whatever it's been. And so now we get to talk about the internet a little bit, which is how we started, I guess. Boom. So where is all this stuff? Don't know. Anybody have any guesses? Not to put anybody on the spot or anything. None? So there's been a couple companies that have built this Therminator technology out, and this is a slide I'm not going to name, I'm not trying to push the technology, I'm just trying to give you the example of something. Is that showing up there? Can you read those? Okay. And the stuff in the black is showing up? Can you read it? I'll read it to you. But I'll tell you the story first. Sales guy goes out to an ISP, Internet Service Provider, and just kind of asks them. Remember Foya said I would talk to a subject matter expert and ask, if I was going to start trying to get the names of the modes on my inertial manifold, I would ask, this kind of thing. Norbert Wiener says it's as if the system was trying to do something to achieve some kind of a goal. When they asked the ISP guy, the guy that put the servers in and loaded the software on them and all this stuff, the guy that built and put them together and ordered and all the work that goes into something like that, they asked him what are his concerns. He came up with things 0 through 11, and the types of things that show up is UDP traffic, which is a protocol, which I'm sure all you guys know, that headed from their ISP and was DNS traffic, UDP and from their ISP that was not DNS traffic, UDP that's not from their ISP and is DNS traffic, so a lot of ifs and other FTPs in there, mails there, webs there, SQL database stuff is in there, ephemeral high port stuff is in there, this kind of thing. So you can kind of see those are the modes. In other words, it's not that hard. We don't have to really maybe have a big theorem to tell us that the internet's trying to do the thing that we the email server is trying to do email. How hard is that to figure out? I really don't need an equation and a inertial manifold theorem to get me there. So that's kind of maybe the thing. So there's sort of reminiscent of Norbert saying the behavior of such systems may be interpreted as directed to the attainment of a goal. He said that 60 years ago. That's a long time. And I guess I skipped through. Uncle Foy says, sorry about this. Yeah, Foya says ask, which is exactly what they did. They asked their customer, what did they think, the subject matter expert kind of thing. So that hopefully brings it home a little bit. Here's a picture of some of the Therminator slide stuff, and this is just a very simple picture, and it's denial of service stuff, and obvious and easy stuff to talk about, but that's the reason why I put it up here. The 0 through 11, the 12 modes are color-coded across the top, and it's a time series, and I guess the older traffic is on the far left, and the newer traffic is on the far right. And the colors are just sort of the dynamics of the modes. And as I go through time, the modes interact with each other, and the colors kind of braid up. And it's not my ISP, and it's not yours, but I bet everybody in the room can look at that picture on the top and tell us when things changed, right? Just because human beings were very good at pattern recognition, right? Anybody ever that can't see a change as you go from left to right across the top? No, see, everyone can see it. And the same story on the bottom, which is kind of the heat part of the signal. You can look across the bottom and you can see the big change. So here's the quote I like to put up there. Like I say, thermodynamics is kind of a bad rap. So this is from a guy who wrote the book, The Arrow of Time. And I'm sure he's a smart guy, and but I don't think he's thought about using equilibrium thermodynamics descriptively as we've done here, because that's all that this is. It's just taking the data and the modes that were given to us by the subject matter expert and just using the dynamics, the rules of interactions that are a theory that's been around for 200 years, and this is the picture that comes out. So it's proven to be kind of a nice way, and I know when you look at it for the first 30 seconds it looks odd. But if you're a system administrator, I was out in some places looking at the signal for like 6 months, and you can just at a glance look at something and just know it's okay or it's not. And you just get so used to, the pattern that the colors make and the timing, the spacing in between the colors and stuff. You just look at it and just know it's okay to go to dinner, or that it's not okay to go to dinner. You don't have to continually stare and look at it like this. You can just kind of glance up every while, and it tells you a nice story. I think human beings are such awesome. Pattern recognition capability kind of built in for whatever, historical reasons. Okay, so this is kind of the wrap up. What we done, or tried to do hopefully, is we took a bunch of ones and zeros, which is the internet traffic, and we tried to make a picture out of that. And we saw, as a human being, it's easier maybe to look at a picture than it is to look at, I can't even look at, be a tome of ones and zeros yay high, and that's like 30 seconds worth of data. I can't even look at that. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't. How would I do it? So I could maybe make a picture. That's something I can see. We talked about that correspondence. And we talked about, okay, that sounds like a nice thing to try, but when you actually go to do it, the number of dimensions is so big that it's prohibitive. I mean, you can't, even that doesn't work. So what can we do with high dimensional dynamics to make them lower? And the things that have been around, couple, 3 generations at the least, in all these areas, a lot of smart folks, trying to do this same kind of business, is those 4 things that are highlighted. And I hope I was able to give you at least a flavor of how they work, some with equations, some with interaction rules, and some, just have a tradition of 200 years of just applications in really diverse areas and a lot of successes. And I hope I tried to convince you that thermodynamics isn't just, I mean, it is equilibrium, but equilibrium kind of is defined on how you define the modes. So if my modes are in equilibrium on a 1.2 dimensional kind of a fractal thing, then that's equilibrium to them, and that's kind of the the idea there. So define your modes, I guess, carefully, you who are definers of modes, because if you don't, woe to you, it'll look like a big mess, And I think that's it. So thank you very, very much for coming, and I hope it was helpful. Any questions at all?
Can you show us those colors again? Read them to us.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, sorry that didn't come out. Let's see. Let me go over to this other. Oh, I can't do this. Shucks. Look, I'll have to go backwards then. Is it? What, is it up? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That.
Forward.
Sorry.
Other way.
I think we're going forward slowly but surely.
One more.
Is that showing up? This one?
Yeah.
Read the categories. Okay, so it's 0 through 12. And if I could probably do it as a tree. See, you guys thought of everything. Does the picture thing work? Okay, how about that? Okay, so it looks like UDP protocol, and it'll be yes UDP or no not UDP, right? And then it'll be from the ISP as the source, yes or no. So we got a tree, and then it'll be ISP. So let's see, shucks. I'll make this yes because it gives me more room to draw, but I wanted it to be no. If it's yes ISP, it looks like I've got FTP, I've got mail, I've got SQL, the database traffic, I've got other services, which I'm interpreting to mean low ports less than 1024 that are not specifically, 25, 23. I forget what the SQL port is. So other low ports other than the ones that are specifically mentioned. In other words, not FTP, not mail, not SQL, but still less than 1023. And then the other one is ephemeral, just high ports greater than 1024. I can't spell ephemeral. That's how embarrassing. Why is yes I can? Because it's written down. Doubly embarrassing. Ephemeral. Okay, there you go. So that's some of them, and yeah. So just the logical consequences of that. Not off of not ISP, it becomes either ephemeral or services. So either low or high port. And if it's yeah. So basically that's it. So you can just make any tree you want. And when the packet comes, you just ask it a series of questions. Are you, whatever. So for example, if it was email, maybe you just want to watch email only. You can say, okay, are you email to one recipient or are you too many? Yes or no. Do you have an attachment or no? Yes or no. Just simple coarse-grained things. You don't have to look and see if it says hi mom or if it says hello mom or how are you mom. You don't need to worry about that. Just simple coarse properties of the packet. And you can get a really nice idea that way of what your email traffic is doing. And it's fast and it's scalable and lots of good things. So it's surprising to me once you get a glimpse of what the traffic is doing, you can kind of bootstrap from there. You get smarter about it, and then you can ask sort of more pointed questions. Typically, when you go to a place, you find a lot of misconfigurations, and people think the traffic's doing something that it's really not. So once they're able to see it, then they can go and they can fine tune. Typical cycle is you go to a place, you hook it up, you get some really interesting deviations, and you get an established pattern and some crazy looking thing. Remember when it rose up so high? Let's see if I can show you. Is that forwarding there? One more. There you go. Like that thing at the bottom, it goes from and then it kind of jumps up to the right. We have one that was just doing that, but a very thin slice, so it looked like the fins on the old caddies. It just kind of did like we used to call them the fins. It'd be like a long flat stretch, and there'd be this fin, and another 20 minutes would go by, and there'd be another fin, and another 20 minutes. Every 20 minutes there's a fin, and we called there's a big army place, and there's a dozen guys running around calling themselves system architect, because it's a big place, and we're going, is this supposed to be doing this? It's like a heartbeat, and they're going, well, what is it? And we show them the traffic, and it's like, oh yeah, that's supposed to be doing that. And these are smart guys, but it's such a big, it's like asking somebody, do they know where a deli is in a big town? They know what a deli is, and they know where a lot of delis are, but they don't know every single deli, And they go, yeah, I think that's supposed to be doing that, Then the next day they come back and say, is this still doing that fin thing? Well, yeah, what machine was that again, And then they come back a couple hours later and say, can you get us that traffic again, And then like 2 hours later, fins are no more, So it's like, whatever it is, it shouldn't have been there, or something was misconfigured, or probably something really benign and dopey. But the point is, it had probably been running like that for a month, say, and no one knew about it. Once you get a chance to look at the traffic, you start tightening it down and getting it to do what you wanted it to do. And then you can make a new set of questions for it, kind of thing. So that's kind of how the applications typically go. It's a lot of fun. So I hope that got the question. It's real flexible. It's just a tree structure, Ask whatever questions are. As long as it's yes, no kind of answers and you can keep it fast, So.
How long a time interval is
Oh.
this? Like 1 hour?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah.
1 minute?
Yeah, it depends. Sometimes, this particular thing, Sam, I don't know because I wasn't there, but I can tell you that, at a network, say, that has maybe 10,000 TCP packets a second, we think in terms of packets per second rather than bits typically, because it's like a, big chunk of information to remove. If there's 10,000 TCP packets a second, there might be only 10 ICMP packets a second. So if I want to have like an ICMP channel, which we typically do, we would watch things like, same kind of tree structure. We'd ask it, are you a request? Are you an error? This kind of thing. So we'd have a back and forth kind of a picture. It turns out to be 8 buckets long. So for that thing at 10 packets a second kind of a rate, we can have like 2 hours or 6 hours of traffic across the screen. If it's something really fast, then we have maybe 15 minutes of use across the screen. But what we like to do is, if it's like what we call old friends, if they're frequent customers, like maybe 2 army places have a lot of traffic back and forth between each other, and we know that they're old friends, we put them off on their own space. And people that talk less frequently, we call them new friends. No one's malicious, everyone's a friend, and we watch the new friend traffic on its own. So again, they used to call it the needle in the haystack problem, but it's just combining your old friends with your new friends. So we say, we don't, you know who your old friends are, you only have 10 of them, kind of thing that you usually deal with. So if someone other than the usual 10 people, you put them on the new friend list. And again, that's a very low and slow rate of stuff. So you could have easily, 12 hours worth of new friends traffic on them. So it kind of depends on, what traffic. Usually we have 4 or 6 different windows of the views of the traffic up. And each view of the traffic has 8, 10, 11 buckets in it. And so depending on the definitions of the buckets, the things anywhere from 15 minutes to 15 hours across kind of thing, So it really varies. I should have brought more pictures of the gizmo, but I did not. Shucks. Anybody else? Anybody doing id stuff or virus stuff or internet? Anybody doing data visualization stuff? Not really. Yeah, you? Oh. Oh, yeah. So, okay. Anyway.
Okay. Well, thank the speaker.
All right. Thank you very much.